Well, the war had gone on for now 3 years. It was April of 1864. The firing on Fort Sumter had been April 12th, 1861. And really, although the Confederacy had been hammered, it certainly had not been beaten. And despite Lee blowing away the flower of his army at Gettysburg, and despite the fact that the North had managed to break its way out of Chattanooga and had more troops to march on Atlanta than the Confederates had to defend Atlanta, there appeared to be no obvious end in sight. Um, Grant, it's one of the little secrets of the Civil War, is that Grant came in to see Mr. Lincoln with a plan to move around Lee and get to Richmond. Um, Lincoln, with a fair amount of foresight and his growing experience as a military commander, realized, of course, that the real objective was Lee's army and the South's ability to make war. If you didn't take out Lee's army, the war would never end. Um, Down south, uh, outside Chattanooga, Joseph Johnston had taken over command of the Confederate Western Army, and probably not a finer general in the war than Joseph Johnston. So while Sherman and Grant, well, had a lot of soldiers, the obstacles to success or to ending the war were pretty significant. And it's going to take almost the entire summer and into the fall to kind of get an edge here. Grant is going to embark on a campaign, not to get to Richmond, but along the way he wanted to draw Robert Lee out into an open battle where Grant's far superior numbers would pretty much finish off Lee, or at least cripple his army, the Army of Northern Virginia, so badly that basically the war would come to an end anyway. Um, Grant said something to the effect of, you know, these great battles are great things to read about so long as you don't have to lose friends in them. Um, and Grant's desire was not to fight Lee where Lee had the advantage. He wanted to get Lee out where he could finish it quickly. Um, of course, that's not what's going to happen. Uh, Lee is not in agreement with all of this. Lincoln's appointment of Grant to head the army. I mean, who else did he have? Sherman was high strung, and none of the other Union generals really had a record which would encourage you to take them. Yeah, Joe Hooker was a fine general, but argumentative, and he had lost to Lee badly once. And there just were not a whole lot of options open. Grant had they called him the bulldog, and he did. He would seize on to something and keep on keeping on until finally, of course, that something had surrendered. Um, Grant could be very inventive. The campaign at Vicksburg certainly shows him at his best. He could be, and at Chattanooga, he could be very stubborn. Otherwise, he would have lost Shiloh. So, again, with the sole exception of the high-strung Sherman, there's just nobody else in Grant's category as a general. And so Lincoln's appointment of Grant makes an awful lot of sense. To get at Lee, you had to get across the Rapidan. And Grant did, and headed south through what's called the wilderness. Now, this is, not sure that Grant expected to get across the Rapidan. Lee had a particular problem, and that is he couldn't feed his horses. So in order to feed, his cavalry horses and in particular his artillery horses, his army was spread out into 3 different camps. So he can't really defend the crossings at the Rapidan. He has to wait for Grant to move so that he knows where Grant is moving and then pull his army together. Grant moves across the Rapidan fairly easily and heads south through what is known as the wilderness, which is this scruffy, roughy, very thickly tangled web of trees and bushes. We talked about it in the video on the Battle of Chancellorsville. Really, it's just horrid stuff. There are 2 good roads. Well, good roads, that's relative. There are 2 roads going through the wilderness, and Grant's army gets through before Lee can pull his troops together. Now, Lee has anticipated what Grant's up to, but he's just had his army is just too scattered. But not all of Grant's army makes it through, and General Ewell, Ewell, hits the back end of Grant's army, and Grant has to turn around in the wilderness. And about the same time, A.P. Hill hits Grant in the middle. So essentially, Grant says, "Well, let's fight here," and so they did under these just awful conditions. And I'm not going to go into this, but at great detail. But this is a battlefield as far as it goes. And on the northern side, Grant makes no real headway. On the southern side, on the second day, Grant makes a good deal of headway, only to run squarely into Longstreet's corps and see that his best fighters get rolled up there. As I said, Grant takes a beating in the wilderness, and on the second day, at the end of fighting on the second day, Grant goes back to his tent and cries his eyes out. And people said that they'd never seen anybody so completely undone as Grant was that night. But Grant's tough. I mean, you gotta hand it to him. He took a hell of a beating in the wilderness. And by the way, the woods caught on fire, so that if you're a wounded soldier, and so you take a bullet through the hip and your hip was smashed, burned to death. There's Ed Beers, a great Civil War lecturer, said it's not the bloodiest battle by any means, but it's the worst. And fighting in the middle of a forest fire and knowing that if you're wounded, you're not going to get away. Man, those are tougher men than me down there. They went to Spotsylvania. Spotsylvania is southwest of the wilderness. Grant got there quickly. Lee got there that much more quickly. Lee said that as sure as he knew that Grant was going to Spotsylvania, and by incredible good luck on Lee's part and anticipation, his troops got there 15, 20 minutes before Grant's troops got there, and they battled it out for about 12 days around Spotsylvania. From the wilderness on, there's never a single hour of a day that the 2 armies are in combat. In the old days, you had battles last a day or 2, or at Gettysburg 3, then the 2 armies would pull apart. Not this time. The 2 armies are stuck together like glue, and there's constant firing. Sometimes it's big fighting. Sometimes it's most of the time it's small fighting. But it doesn't matter whether you get killed in a small skirmish or in a huge battle, you're still dead. And so the grinding goes on. North Anna, Grant shifts southeast again and tries to get around Lee on the North Anna River. There's a place there where you can cross the river fairly easily. Again, Lee anticipates Grant, gets there first, comes up with kind of a novel way of disposing his troops. You can't see it on this map here, but essentially Lee set his army up kind of like a V. And essentially, if this side of Lee's army got in trouble, it could be reinforced from this side, and if this side got in trouble, it could be reinforced from that side. Nothing Grant could do. There's no good way to get at Lee, and so he had to back off of North Anna. He again heads south. There's a couple of battles because it's all one battle at this point. It's just sometimes it's hotter than it is at other times. And Grant gets to Cold Harbor. Again, he is just slightly ahead of Lee. Lee's coming down with great speed, but Grant actually gets there. These two armies are exhausted. They have not stopped fighting since the first day of the Battle of the Wilderness. All your good soldiers are dead because good soldiers go, where good soldiers go and they get killed. Your officers are dead. Your people who I saw a memorial one time of all the officers who died in the Overland Campaign, and it's just stunning how many captains and lieutenants and majors and you had blown away your officer corps. Happened on both sides. Although because Grant's attacking, loses more of that type of soldier than Lee does. That not only the generals are tired too. General Warren on the northern side may have had a bit of a nervous breakdown at this point. He's just exhausted, as is almost everybody else. Lee, Ewell is gone. He's exhausted. Longstreet was badly wounded at Wilderness. Lee's fighting with his second string commanders. And Grant, for reasons which are absolutely mystifying, decided that he would attack straight ahead. And you can see these two lines here. They're nice straight lines. Would attack straight ahead at Cold Harbor. Well, by the time you turn that big army of Grant's and head up the road toward Cold Harbor, Lee had plenty of time to dig all the trenches you could ever want. It was a massacre. Historians don't really agree on how many soldiers Grant lost, but he lost an enormous number of soldiers. Lee lost a relatively small number in this. There's only one place where the Union even got close to the Confederate lines, and soldiers, pinned their names on their uniforms so their bodies could be identified. At one point, Grant ordered a unit to attack, and the commander refused, saying that he wouldn't make such an attack if Jesus Christ himself ordered it. And so, it was just a slaughter. It should never happen. It's one of the few times that Grant said, "I made a mistake," and he really did. But all of this banging away, Lee's got the smaller armies, and it's tired. And Lee's, as I say, is fighting with his second string commanders at this point. And Grant finally breaks away from Lee, and basically turns his back on Lee, trusting that Lee's army is exhausted. And had it not been exhausted, I think Grant would probably have been destroyed. But Lee's army is too tired to really keep track of where Grant is at. And Grant slips south of the James River and comes up at Richmond from the south, reaches a place called Petersburg, where there's a very small Southern army holding on. And suddenly he's got much of Grant's army in front of him. It was more than 10-1, maybe 12-1 odds. But Grant's soldiers and his officers are either wounded or so tired they can't function. And that small Southern army holds on for a couple of days until such time as Lee can get there with his main army. And with that, the Overland Campaign, 30-some days of endless fighting, comes to an end. Both armies are stuck at Petersburg. And had things not happened in other places, I think those two armies would be there yet. Lee could and did build trenches far better than almost any other soldier could. Grants, applied pressure, better than probably anybody else could. The immovable force, or the irresistible force and the immovable object. And they just fought it out there from June of 1864 to April of 1865. And as I say, they might still be there had things not happened in other places. Okay, everybody out there, stay calm, stay safe, and above all, stay healthy. Take care, everyone.